Well, we have invited Kathy this morning from Dragonfly Longarm Quilting to come speak with you in regards to prepping your quilts if you take them to a longarm quilter. So take it away, Miss Kathy.
Oh my gosh, I didn't know I was going to be first, and I love the lines on the parking lot.
They're so fabulous.
Yes, tickles me every time I look out the window. All right, thank you for having me. There are a lot of, do I have to look at the camera?
Yeah, if you want to talk to them.
You can look at me.
Yeah, you can look
All
at
right,
James.
that would be
Close
easier
enough.
for
Yeah.
me. Do not be surprised at backlogs that any long armor is going to have right now. The year of COVID 2020 has presented long armors with a dilemma of many new customers, and a lot of them don't know a lot about long arming. Long arming is different than trying to quilt at home. On your own machine, even if you were hand quilting, the rules are different how it's handled. So when you feel free to call a long armor first and ask the questions you don't know, because you don't know what you don't know. And I know that's deep. But when you take your quilt to a long armor, your pieces, your 3 pieces of the layers are all separate. You should have your top, your back, and bring your own batting if your long armor accepts it or not. They may have it for sale or it may be included. You have to ask them. But the 3 layers are not sandwiched together. If you've done that, it has to be taken apart because a quilt is loaded on a long arm in that order: bottom, then the batting is layered on, then the top is layered on, and we go from the top to the bottom, unlike if you were doing this at home and you would start in the middle and work out. So, a couple of things. When you're constructing your top, it behooves you to cut and trim all the top threads that lay on top of your quilt. Everything caught in seams. Now, you can do it after it's long-armed, but it's more difficult because now you're pulling it out from under. So it's going to take you longer, where if you just go ahead and trim those seams or those threads as you're pressing your seams, then you'll spend less time doing that. And it is quite obvious to any long armor who has given it a whirl. And because we know threads multiply. You fold all this together and threads are, coming off on other parts. But it is quite obvious who gives it some effort. So do that. Now, the threads on the back of your top are not as important unless you had a lot of, let's say all these cheddar pieces in this quilt were white or muslin colored. Any dark threads that are peeking over and laying on the cheddar, which would be white, that will shadow through. And once the quilting happens, then they're mushed together and they become quite obvious and very glaring, extremely glaring. So, and your long armor is not going to cut those for you. Now, if it looks like you made the effort, we will as we go. We keep trimming. Now we're advancing and we're going to keep trimming those bottom threads. But if you haven't done that on your own, we don't have time to do that because, girls, that's another 8-12 hours. Yeah. So
Can
that
be,
is,
yeah.
yes, it can be. So you need to handle that as you go, and your end product will be prettier. All right. So also on your top, if you have, if your piecing comes all the way to the edge, let me turn this way, like this. There's no border on this. And I love borderless quilts. Not all of them, but I do love without borders as well. But this quilt could use some stay stitching. And if you had piano keys or a lot of piecing that comes to the edge of your quilt, stay stitch 1/8 of an inch from the edge. And it's not a tight stitch. And it's only 1/8 of an inch in because you don't want it to be more than 1/4, because then your binding is not going to cover it and it'll show. So about 1/8 of an inch in, and not real tight, because if you do your stitches very tight, then it'll pucker up and it's going to pull in. All right, so that's another thing you can do. Otherwise, these seams start to come open at the edge. And because you're not back tacking with your sewing machine as you're going, you're doing.
Do you have a recommended stitch length for a stay stitch?
Even 8 per inch, or 9, maybe even 10. But you don't need a 12 stitches per inch. But you can tell if you get really tiny, it's like it starts to pucker. And so now, if you have a border, these borders have already caught all of these individual pieces here, and so with a border, you don't need to do any stay stitching. You may if you want to, but you don't need to at all. All right. So your next layer is your batting, and it needs to be 4 inches bigger on all 4 sides than your top. 4 inches on this side, 4 inches on that side, so that's 8 inches. 4 and 4 is 8. Top and bottom, 4 and 4 inches is 8, so that has to be larger than your top. So now let's get to the backing. The backing seems to be a big, fat, hairy deal. Don't rely on the measurement on your pattern. Whoever designed that pattern, their long armor may only want, they might have only allowed for 3 inches per side. And almost all long armors have gone to 4 inches, because if we say 3 inches, you give us 2. It's funny how that works. Funny how that works. So, but it's like, well, it's just on that side. Well, yeah, but all 4 sides of your backing are connected to the machine, to the rollers or clamps, and it's critical. All 4 sides need to be straight. Don't chew the edges off with your teeth. Use your rotary cutter. And they need to be straight, and not a slanted straight. They need to be straight and on grain. Now, we're glad to put it on grain for you. At Dragonfly Long Arm Quilting, we do it all the time. And also, don't get all wrapped around the axle on, well, it's got to be 4 inches, and I have to cut this down to 4 inches extra on all 4 sides for your backing. It can be bigger. That's fine. And if it's way too big, we'll cut off what we need, but we're more accustomed to doing that, and then you're not apt to make a mistake. So don't try to cut it down to 4 inches if it's just, a few more over that. Bigger is just fine. Another thing you can do is on your backing, if you're having to piece your backing to put selvage to selvage together to make your backing large enough for your quilt top, on the interior seams, make your seam, of course this isn't very good to see, and then you can trim your selvage off. Not everybody does that, but trim your selvage off so you don't have that tight weave there on the interior of your quilt. But the edges you can leave your selvages on, and then that gives us, your long armor and you, a perfectly straight edge. This is the only perfectly straight thing on your backing. So leave that there. Don't trim that off like you're worried that it's going to end up in the backing of your quilt, because it's not. That's what we're grabbing onto, and that's our jumping off point in getting your backing straight. So leave those on unless it's an interior seam, okay? And then it makes it easier for you as well. So measure your top when it's done, and add your 8 inches from what your top actually turned out to be, because the pattern is perfect math and we're not perfect. So measure what your quilt is, add 8 inches to the width, 8 inches to the length, and that's what your backing needs to be, or bigger. Selvages, we'll put it on grain. So speaking of on grain, if you get lucky and find 108-inch wide backings, they are the bomb. It's actually cheaper to buy wide backing than put, rows and rows of 45-inch wide fabric together, and it's much easier as well. But you only need 3 yards compared to 9 yards of backing, and it's much cheaper. But that's a huge piece of fabric, and when they're wrapped at the factory onto those big bolts, they get kind of twisted and torqued. So we need to get them on grain, and so it's recommended that you buy about 1/4 yard more than you need, because by the time we get this side on grain and the whole thing on grain, you can lose many inches on each side, and then it may be too narrow to use as your backing.
And we did start ripping our
Yes,
wives to help with that too.
Cinnamon started tearing the fabric, so that gets it on grain, and it may look crooked to your eye, but you have less waste, because we get it on grain and go, we're good, even though these look funny to you. We can tell by the fold that it's on grain. And I think the only thing else I'd like to add is if you want a label on the back of your quilt and you've already put it on the back, make sure you put it way inside. Because don't get too close to those edges, because it may end up not on the quilt backing. Yes, and don't do double-sided quilts. I know that sounds like a great idea, but we do have very little control of the backing. We cannot see it, and fabric is fluid, and your seams will go.
Do that again.
Do some hula dancing.
And your seams go, and you could get puckers on the back trying to be clever and I'll combine these into one and be done. That doesn't work out real well. It can be a disaster. So it's a deep subject that I adore. And but that's about it for right now.
Thank you. We're
Yes.
so grateful you guys are next door. So if anyone doesn't know, Kathy works at Dragonfly Longarm Quilting, and they are next door. They're right inside of our building, just in a separate area. So they're at the same address. And if you want to give your phone number over there.
Yes. So we are 904-574-9306 is Dragonfly Longarm Quilting. We are by appointment only, and extremely busy because of this COVID year. There are quilters.
Everybody's been quilting.
Everybody, and new quilters. It's amazing. It's wonderful.
We'll let you get back to work, but thank you for your time
Thank
this
you.
morning.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Happy holidays, everybody. Bye. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, y'all.